The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are in the U.S. and Canada. I know we've got some people in other locations, but we've got a fairly good representation of both across America and across Canada. And I even saw British Columbia on the list there. So hello, and how is everyone today? My name is Jim Satterfield. I'm the CEO and president of Firestorm, and we're delighted to continue our webinar series. And we're going to be focusing today on communicable illness. And we did a session this morning designed for schools because, as you can imagine, some of the problems are a little bit different or unique in a school environment. But this afternoon, we're going to be focusing on a business environment and what you need to think about in each of those areas. Now, this webinar was labeled the quiet crisis because imagine if no one's coming to work, then it's going to be pretty quiet around your office or your location. And we want to talk about what you need to do to think about those things today. And we'll go into this on a couple of different levels as we continue our conversation. First, I'd like to let you know that we are active on social media, and you can find us through any of these channels. And there is a hashtag for today's engagement, and that is #CrisisCoach. We monitor that, and we'll be responding throughout as possible. So if you haven't joined us here or in our newsletter, we do a newsletter every week. It goes out on Thursday morning. So if you didn't receive one in your inbox, you might want to go to our website and sign up because it's an opportunity to get updates, be aware of other events, and to take advantage of those throughout the month. There is a disclaimer. Every time we do a webinar, our attorneys always like us to go, wait, it's not me. It's okay. But you've got to look at the oral comment in conjunction with the slides, and that what we're presenting today should not be considered a plan, and you should work with your own counsel and regulatory bodies in terms of what your requirements are. Firestorm, our goal is to transform crisis into value. We've been around since 2005, so we are getting ready to start our 14th year here. In fact, we have completed 13 years doing this. And our goal is to be your crisis coach. That's a registered trademark here in America, as we work with companies before, during, and after a crisis. And our goal is to transform that crisis into value for your organization. We provide a variety of different services, crisis risk work both before and then managing the events. We supply people and staffing both on a permanent basis as well as a staff augmentation or alternative workforce capability. We do development and training, security solutions, physical security, as well as cyber security, professional services or planning, training, exercises, intelligence solutions. We do predictive intelligence. We'll talk a little bit about intelligence today with a program called First Sight, intervening when the first behavior of concern or event occurs. And then finally, analytic solutions, benchmarking, and a series of diagnostic tools there. In fact, there's, again, if you will look in the newsletter today or go on our website, we have an open survey that you can participate in and get that information. So as we think about our topic today, we're planning for disruption is one of the things that we spend a lot of time working on with our clients at any given time. And there are four things that could happen to a business. You could lose your people, your facility, your technology, or your reputation. Or it could be a combination of those things. I know we've all been watching with concern in California with the fires and pictures and the devastation there. And those really affect a great many things. You can certainly see that locations have been destroyed, people have been displaced, the infrastructure is severely damaged, and certainly those elements. But today we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. We're going to focus on the people side of your business, and in particular those that could be impacted by a pandemic or communicable illness. So that's a good break point for me to emphasize that word, communicable illness. We have found that many times when you introduce the phrase pandemic, that there is a skepticism that it could ever happen here. And so there tends to be, well, we'll think about that somewhere down the road. But if you can broaden it in their mind and in your organization structure to cover communicable illness, yeah, there's seasonal flus, there are other outbreaks that occur from time to time. Yeah, we probably should be prepared for that. And so it will help you to gain the buy-in. And anytime we're talking about a program, getting buy-in from leadership is a critical element in each of these. So as we're thinking about communicable illness in particular, I want to drive some thoughts through to you, and then we'll identify them on subsequent slides. The first is location, location, location. I'm not selling real estate here, which is the term we hear all the time when you talk about the value of a property, as where is it located. But when you're thinking about communicable illness or pandemics, it's where is the outbreak in relationship to where your location is. So location and proximity will be key factors, and we're going to talk a lot about that today as we talk about triggers and then activation of your plans. Fear, panic, and rumors, this is the type of thing that also you will have to address. And as we go through each of these, monitoring what's being said, how people are reacting, and then preparing that within your organization becomes critical. And recognition that it is really occurring, that this thing is there and it is something that we need to have in place. Now, all of our plans, as we've been focusing to try to get them simpler and in the hands of your leadership, look at three words. What are the decisions you need to make? What are the actions you need to take? And what are the words that you need to say? So as we go through our presentation today, we'll kind of touch on those three concepts at multiple points to help lead you through this process. So please keep these considerations in mind as we continue our conversation. Now, a pandemic is a human resources crisis because you're going to lose your workforce. Also, if people are not able to work, then it's going to impact their income and what are their alternative sources of funds associated with this. So it becomes a risk to the organization, not only during the event, but subsequently and to all of your staff. Now, when we've seen these types of events before, it's not unusual for us to see double-digit absenteeism rates. And to think of it as 20, 30, or 40% is not an unrealistic expectation. Now, if you're like most organizations, there's not a lot of people sitting around in your company with nothing to do, and so if you lost 10 or 20%, you could still deliver. You take an impact of 40% of your workforce not being available, it will have a material impact on your organization. By the way, that 40% can extend not only to your workforce, but your key suppliers, the supply chain, your customers, and it will be a material disruption to your business. One thing that's lost many times with a pandemic is that there are waves within the pandemic. It's not a once and done kind of an event. You get a first wave, there's a lull period of 4 to 6, maybe even 7 months. There's the second wave of that pandemic, another lull period, and a third. So if there is a pandemic, you need to understand this is going to be an event that's going to impact us for several periods within our organization. And so what we're going to have to look at, how we can do our business with an absent workforce or remote workforce capability instilled. We're going to go into this in a lot more detail as we think about it. The first thing I want to establish is you need to know when to take action. That's going to be one of the common themes that you're going to hear a lot about today and is a major difference in the approach that we take to looking at these types of problems and responding to them. And then how you manage those things becomes even more critical, but we've got to understand where we are relative to the outbreak that's going on, that location in each of those areas. Now, you're going to be getting reports from a variety of sources, and we'll spell those out in a little bit more detail as we go through today. But it's important then for you to know that ultimately you've got that responsibility for your organization to make those critical decisions. Now, the animation slide that's coming up, and sometimes in a webinar this is a little kludgy when they happen. So as it should be all up now, or will all be up on your slide shortly. We think about modes of transmission. This is a background just to kind of lead you into the process that we're going to think about. One, there's direct contact between the first person and the second person. You imagine shaking hands or being in direct contact there. You're going to see that's how this type of a communicable illness can be transmitted. Indirect contact, and that could be through a third product, money. Imagine cash being transmitted from one person to another, and that money is contaminated, and then the infection would come as a result of that. And the avian flu, 1917, 1918 range, money was a key transmission at that point in time. A little bit of a different thought about laundering money, if you think about those areas. I doubt many people in this call were dealing with that problem at that time. Droplet transmission, that's the sneeze and the liquid that would be there and out in a particular area. And then finally, airborne. Every one of the communicable illnesses have different transmission modes, some more than another, some all of them combined together. It's important to think about these things when we think later about the actions that you're going to need to take. Now, what are the signs and the symptoms? And you see them listed on the left on your screen. I won't read the list, but if you're thinking about what's happening in your organization, and as we start to plan and looking, when we're hearing of these things occur, it's going to tell us that, wait a minute, we need to take some action and to do certain things. Now, I will like you to know that this is actually not my first grade class over here on the side. I hopefully went to school a little bit after that. But even in, it was brought back about looking at avoiding influenza and gargle daily, and that group is dedicated to doing that. I'm just a little worried about where that spit will take place in the cup associated with it. So we've got signs and symptoms, we've got modes of transmission. Where are the decision triggers that we need to think about when we start to get into this? And we're going to go into this direction. The next slide I'm going to put up is the most complicated one in the webinar today. So I'm going to spend a few minutes to explain it, and then it'll lead us in a couple of different directions. Now, I brought back our location, because that's something that you can make a difference in your organization by emphasizing. We need to understand where this is relative to where we are located. And we'll talk about where we're located in just a second. Now, the World Health Organization drives most of the information that comes out around pandemics globally. And they made a change a number of years ago to a simplified pandemic chart into 4 phases. Inter-pandemic period, where we are now, nothing is in fact occurring. An alert phase, where they see a new virus being identified in humans. We see pandemics and viruses identified in various species, chickens, pigs, birds on a regular basis. But it's when it's in the human body that it becomes an issue for them to raise it to an alert phase. They then go to a pandemic phase, regardless of where it is, regardless of anything else, when there's a spread of the influenza caused by a new virus. When it's starting to be transmitted, up there in the alert phase, they've now seen it go to a person. Now, when you're in the pandemic phases, it's going to more than one person. It's being spread and distributed across a wider basis. And then a transition phase is, hey, it's now declining. We're going to de-escalate. We're going to go back. And that would be short-lived, and then you'd be back in the interim pandemic period. Now, one of the things that Firestorm observed, we developed the first communicable illness pandemic plan back in 2006. We were brought in by one of the largest retailers in America to develop a plan for them, and there was a particular concern at the time around the avian flu, which had a much higher fatality rate associated with it. And it was a requirement from their board that they have a plan in place to deal with it. Think of it as a break the glass plan, which we get asked regularly to design and do. So we developed a program for them, but one of the things that we identified is you need to understand where you are relative to the outbreaks that are going on. So on that right side there where it says Firestorm Communicable Illness 6 stages, that's Firestorm intellectual property there. And I want to step you through that because I think it's going to help you understand what you need to do and, more importantly, when you need to do it. The pre-action stage, we combined the first two from the World Health Organization. It's the period between the outbreaks, the diseases in animals. There is no or limited animal to human transmission. Once you start to see that transmission there, beyond the word limited, now you're in the imminent stage. That's a stage where you're seeing Firestorm break apart the pandemic phase from the World Health Organization into 4 separate stages. Imminent means it's mutated, it's now being transmitted human to human. There's a new virus that causes human cases. It's not efficient or sustained, but we want to be informed about what's going on. So as we later give you responsibilities, you'd be tracking that and understanding, what does this mean? What are the precautions that we can take? Now, the onset phase, we've got divided into 3 different stages. The first is guarded, efficient and sustained human-to-human transmission in America, or if you're in Canada, and the impact is low risk to normal business environment, employees and customers, future potential to be at risk. This, where you saw in imminent, it was limited. Now it's broader. Now we're starting to see it being transmitted, but guarded here in, I'm normally in Atlanta, Georgia, but if this outbreak was happening in California, it's not going to have a direct impact on our operations in the Atlanta area, being on the other coast. Possible exception to that could be large supply chain issues that could be happening, or particular client bases or individuals on travel. The escalation from that is to elevated person-to-person cases, presence in close geographic proximity, and moderate risk to normal business environments and customers. So let's say that instead of it being in California and I'm in Atlanta, maybe it's in the southeast. It's in the surrounding states of where we are, and some over into the state of Georgia where we're located. It becomes severe when it's person-to-person cases in close geographic proximity, high risk for dramatic reduction in ability to sustain any level of operations and risk. Well, what's changed from that yellow elevated to the severe is it's now in Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta. Our employees are sick. They can't come to work. It's starting to affect our ability to deliver. And so as you're seeing here, there's a natural escalation of the decisions and actions that you need to take, and the directions that you give, the words would vary depending upon which stage. Then in the post outcome, you start doing business resumption and how do we return to normal, or what in some cases we would refer to as a new normal. Now with that background, we're going to start to go more and more under the covers to figure, what does this mean to you and your business? What do we monitor at each one of these stages? We understand them, Jim. What do we need to do? You've got to monitor, and look at that second line in the blue cloud. You must assign someone the monitoring role within your company and your organization. I think it's important that you assign 1 person and 2 backups. You need to be at least 3 deep. Remember, this is a communicable illness, so if we assign 1 person and they're not available, then that's going to present a difficulty. All of us have been in work where suddenly an employee is terminated or they take a job somewhere else. And now, well, who else here can do that? If you only have 1 person who knows, you then have created a single point of failure. And our monitoring level increases, you see, as it moves closer and closer to you. So again, location, location, location. And so the decisions that you need to make are going to be driven by what your monitoring is telling you to do. And then similarly, the actions that you take and the words again of those results. Well, where can you get information? Well, you can go to external websites, the World Health Organization, the CDC, U.S., Canadian, state or province governments, local and national news. What are the reports that are on the television channels that you watch, or the alerts that you get from Twitter or any of the search engines that you use? And external tracking, what's going on around you? Are there school closings in your area? Are other businesses closing? Are events starting to be canceled? Quarantines? Are there shortages of medicine? Fuel shortages? Any of these things could be indicators, and they're external. They're outside of your business. Several years ago, when the swine flu came into America from Mexico, we were monitoring at a high level as part of the program that we're doing for clients. And when we started to observe that they were canceling soccer matches in Mexico, that they were closing churches, Catholic churches on the weekends, that shopping malls were closing, all of those were indicators that something was going on in Mexico that related to this topic, and there had to be an intervention associated with it. Internal, absenteeism, number of people seeking help, number confirmed with the illness. So monitoring, having these together. We're going to go further in depth in this in just a second, because knowing not only what to do, what decisions you need to make, knowing when becomes one of the key elements. So this aspect of it, you've got to look at these triggers, and you need to establish them for your organization. We're making some suggestions here today, and if you clearly want to look at your business, we can go deeper and deeper into each one of these elements. But if you look at it, actions may include alerting, modifying the structure of the work environment. Maybe we're going to close earlier. Maybe we're going to work on alternative days. These people come in on Mondays, these come in on Tuesday, another group comes back. Social distancing, which we'll talk about. There are a whole series of steps that you can take that can make a difference to lower your risk profile. But your leadership team has to have the responsibility to make those decisions when any trigger is reached. So if you identify the triggers in advance, then it helps the team make those decisions at those critical times. Just with like any other business continuity program or a crisis management program, having the leadership team predetermine this and have buy-in becomes very, very critical. Now, here are some sample decision triggers and locations that you might find that information. In the pandemic pre-action area that Firestorm identified, look at who, look at what they're doing in that alert area. Pandemic is imminent. You start to see the addition of your newscast, the CBS, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, other bodies around in doing it. You also start to see some other things. If you see a mobilization or deployment of a foreign government or an army, when the Ebola events came out of Africa a couple of years ago, you saw the army moving there to start to restrict travel. That's an indicator that something's going on. So it's not in your area, but it's another sign that something has to happen, or a foreign government, or even a university activating its plan could be an indicator. Now, if we move beyond that into the onset guarded, now this is where it seems to be further out. It's starting to be transmitted, but not in our area. And if you're in Canada and you're reading it says confirmed cases transmitted in America, you would be reading it transmitted in Canada. Although I would follow the U.S. because obviously we're close by, and the travel between one country and another is extremely easy. So you'd be looking at the news reports, the CDC, and now you're starting to look at the absenteeism rate within your own company. Now at elevated, it's now in closer proximity. It's moving where it might have been on the other coast. It's now around where your location is. Again, the same news types of channels there, but we're looking for medical surges. The stories are going to be around, wait a minute, there's a run in the hospital, there's a delay. We've seen situations where hospitals have had to set up tents to do pre-screening to deal with those areas. By the way, these types of events, when they start to incur, you're going to get secondary impacts because if individuals are having heart attacks or strokes or others, can't get into a medical facility, then we're going to have a secondary set of impacts and areas. For someone that needs dialysis, obviously there could be limitations associated with it. Again, looking at the absenteeism rate, and here we're saying when it's greater than normal, probably every day in your company you might have 1 or 2 or 3%. You might even be a little higher during cold and flu season. But if you start to see it go into double digits, 10, 20, 30% or more, that's a key indicator that, wait a minute, it's here now and we need to do this. Now, as we think about it, onset severe, that means it's here now, it's right where we are. And you'll see more things that you're starting to look at, closure of an airport, extreme symptoms or deaths within the region. This is going to be dominating your local news. When you see daycare centers close where you're located, when you start to see cancellation of events, places of worship, discontinuing their services, all of these could be early indicators, and there would be triggers for your particular plans. Post-pandemic, how do you know it's getting to be over? Well, you see the absenteeism rate drop, you see the lack of reporting, and those events are starting to come together. So what are our strategies to implement? And these are the decisions that we need to think about. Do we need to start getting supplies in? How do we do that? Back when we saw the surges starting to come into place with the swine flu and the avian flu that had earlier, there was a shortage of masks for people to wear, or a shortage of particular drugs that Tamiflu to be taken. Looking at provisions, we're going to need to do more cleaning, so you might want to get some of those supplies identified. At one of those earlier stages might be a point when it's just moving from imminent to guarded that you would go ahead and get the cleaning supplies that you would need to start to put in place. Develop a process to report substantial increase in absenteeism. Maybe you don't do time cards. Maybe people don't punch in. How do we suddenly become aware of what's going on? Identify methods to reduce the spread. We talked about social distancing, alternative work times, planning for removing employees that are ill. Most of us grow up in an environment where, wait a minute, it's just the sniffles. I can make it to work. I'm going to do my job. That's not what we want here, because we're bringing that disease on site. How do we get services if a number of our people are not going to be here? Who's going to take over the cleaning if the cleaning staff can't come in? How do we handle the supplies and a variety of things? We have to communicate our plan to our employees. In some cases, we may need to reassign people or even have volunteers to do it. And then how are we going to communicate it through each one of the strategies? So there's a lot to think about in these areas. And the other aspect I would encourage you to do is sit down and talk with a risk manager in your organization about business interruption insurance and what does it apply, how does it work in this particular area, what if there's mandated closure, what's covered, how do we get our people money? There could be a run on people trying to access their 401ks or other supplies. Is this an issue that they caught this as a result of a workers' comp claim? I came to work and got sick here, or is this covered by my health insurance? How do these elements start to come into play? And look at your contracts, both in terms of delivering to your customers as well as your suppliers, and whether they can be counted on and what level of services start to come into play. Now, we're going to take those stages and break them and talk specifically about things that you need to be doing in each one of the stages that we listed. And so we've talked about decisions. Now we're talking about actions. Review the triggers for escalation from one stage to the next. That's things that you should be considering right now. Establishing that monitoring plan and the individuals in advance. Training and educating the employees. Conduct periodic reviews to evaluate and revise the plan. Now, we do fire drills on a regular basis. You're required, depending upon your location, to do it once a year or twice a year. I would encourage you to take an exercise and think of it from a communicable illness standpoint, and how would we respond if we had this event, and see what it's like to do remote work on those days or those other actions that would come in. When it's at the imminent stage, we then would increase the education of our employees. We know that it's out there. There is human transmission. Remind people where we are. Go back and let's get those resources inside for us. That could be supplies. It could be material. We may even have some employees that would need to remain at work instead of going home so that we can keep that capability built into it. Review the plan with leadership and make adjustments now because the likelihood has gone up. We moved from that interim period, the pre-action, to where it could be, in fact, imminent. Now, suddenly, it has happened. It's not in our immediate area. We're at our guarded stage in operations at this point. So we've got to be looking closer now internally at our people, evaluate the likelihood and the timing of the disease to start to impact us as an organization. Hey, it was in California. I'm seeing now it's moving over to Chicago and St. Louis, and I'm on the East Coast. It's headed my way. Increase communication with the employees so they start to need. Communicate with the CDC and WHO and other government agencies to find out, is there a particular defense on this particular illness that's coming? What are the steps that we need to take to mitigate those impacts and understanding? The slide earlier with the children who were gargling, when you look at those, the fever, the vomiting, those types of things will be important to tell us about understanding what to be looking for. Then it's elevated. It's now within our area. It's within our region, not necessarily in our town, but it's coming. We're going to increase our surveillance on our people. We're going to take additional steps to mitigate some of the impacts. Maybe we have a no visitor policy that we're going to establish. We're not going to let people come in who might be bringing the illness in. We want to talk about social distancing, spreading desks further apart, limiting contact, changing hours, having people work alternative days. How do we modify these things? How do we let them work remotely? What are our communications decisions around closure? When are we going? How bad does it have to be for us to close our business from an operational standpoint where people are required to come in? And you want to be able to maintain this remote capability. Now, I would recommend that once and hopefully twice a year, you would pick whatever your slowest day of the week is and try a scenario where everyone worked remotely during that afternoon so that you can see what problems did we run into with remote access, how do we have a load problem, what is it that people need at home that they don't currently have, because there could well become the opportunity that this must be addressed. And then it's now severe. It's where you are. The problem is right at your company. So we've got to make those decisions to close, maximize our communications out to our people, and then where possible, maintain as much work as we can during this period with prolonged employee absences. Once it's ending, then we start to phase into normal operations. It's not flipping a switch, going from none to all. Maybe you start to bring some departments in. You start to pick that up, and we're going to maintain our surveillance because I've told you there are 3 waves. You've just experienced the first wave. There will be 2 others to follow in the following months. So we've gone through the stages. We've talked about the triggers and then the decisions. Now let's talk about some policies that we think you should certainly start to put into place. We're going to cover some 5 key ones and then some additional things to go into your thought process. Cleaning and hygiene. In most cases, a 5% bleach solution will kill the germs that you're dealing with. Alcohol is also effective, but I would say if once you've gotten into the event where you're talking about elevated, it's clearly when you're talking about severe, but it may be too late then, I would encourage you in the imminent and guarded to start to make sure you have sufficient supplies. Also, cleaning is not necessarily as easy as you think about it. Clearly, if it's tile floors or wood, mopping those becomes easy. What about carpets? How are you going to deal with it? The opening of the doors into the restroom, the turning on the faucets. Are you requiring people to touch? Again, that mode of transmission becomes a factor associated with it. Cleaning countertops in all of the areas. Excuse me, Hang on. I went the wrong way. That's going to happen. I see I had a cough, and I gave it to you over this call. Social distancing. We haven't talked about that a lot in corporations until we get to the point of these events starting to come into place. The hanging out by the water cooler is certainly not going to be something that's going to occur. The employee cafeteria could well be another area. Alternate workforces or moving desks further away could certainly be an area. Also looking at any of the things, who has to physically come into the office? Can we start letting some employees work remotely earlier in the cycle to reduce the proximity? Travel procedures, well, if we knew this was happening on the West Coast, we might want to reduce travel to that particular direction. We might have rules that, I'm sorry, you can't make that trip at this time. We have to try to change that to a video conference for the meeting associated with it. So tracking what's going on geographically will become a key element associated with it. Visitors, one of the things that we've seen, and when we were working with the retailer, as you have people coming in to meet with buyers to show their products and services or other areas, you might curtail all visitors for a period of time. Particularly as you move beyond the elevated, you're not going to be letting anyone else that you do not know, you don't know where they've been, to bring in materials or to sit and meet in those areas. Where possible, we're going to change to virtual meetings and not face-to-face. Telework is, again, one of the key tools, because if we can reduce human-to-human contact, it's going to have a difference. So what's our policy? What triggers it? How do people get paid? And designing those programs. We've written these types of policies in each of these areas for companies, and it has to be a part of your HR manual. And you may have a manual that, here's our HR policies and procedures when we're not at risk. Now effective, we have declared that we have an exposure and a disruption. We're going to now follow these new rules because that's what's required for our company at this time, and changing that over. So work with your HR and legal team in designing those. Additional policies, are you going to provide antiviral products? The Tamiflu is the one that's regularly been given out for this. Are you buying it just for the employee? Are you buying it for the employee's family? How are you making it available? We have seen in these types of events, key shortages come into play. How do you do that? How do you handle it? How do we handle leave in these areas? Non-discrimination, so that you don't want to have a point where you're just giving it to your senior leadership and putting it in. What about school closing? My school's closed and I have to stay home with my child. What's your policy and how are you going to handle it? Are you going to do screening? There have been in past events where infrared readers to see, wait a minute, this person's coming in with a fever. Are you going to allow them to work? Are you going to not allow? What happens with self-disclosure when someone says that they have the illness themselves or someone in their family, and the vaccine policy? If you put these all together, they're checklists that need to be created and policies that must be written at this point in time, so that you're not trying to do it all at one time. Then communication. So we've gone through decisions and actions, and now we're going to be talking about words. What are we going to tell our people? What are we going to tell our customers that are counting on us? So we've got to start to provide the information about what we're seeing, why we're making that, disseminating that. Now, I also will warn you in advance, you are dealing with confidential information. You cannot tell someone else that Mary has the flu. That's privileged and confidential information. So we have to provide the information directly to the individuals, but we can't share what's physically going on, because this again could be an opportunity for discrimination. Certainly confidential information associated with it and the records that you have. And when we talk about information security and we think about PII, personally identifiable information, here we're going to be dealing with PHI, personal health information, or in some cases even HIPAA related documentation that you need to be careful with. Having this put together makes a difference. Also think about this both from a linguistic standpoint. I almost had a hard time saying linguistics today. Obviously, English may not be my first language. And culturally, what's the right thing that you can say and do associated with it? So it's not a one-size-fits-all in each of these areas, but planning the words out and how you say those make a difference. That will make a large help. When you do reopen, you're going to need to clean. Before anyone is ever going to come back to work, they're going to want to know that it's safe to come in. Putting that cleaning in place, making sure that you have it, and again, a general reaction is you need a minimum of a 5% bleach solution to kill most of the areas. Now, depending upon what the viruses and bacteria in those areas, when you look at it, there will be guidelines from the CDC and World Health Organization. There'll be further there, but you need to be able to give a health assurance to your employees that is in fact safe for them to be back in the work environment. Now, it doesn't come from kissing pigs. When I saw this picture when we were dealing with the swine flu, I thought it was just adorable to see this child. It's not, you don't have to have direct contact there. Remember the transmission slide that I talked with you before. It could be from a surface, it could be from something else, it could be airborne, but when we think about this, it's not going to be this clear of how it got to where it is from that standpoint. Adorable child. So who's in charge? You are. In the middle of the screen, it says the words you are. You have a leadership role in your organization. That's the reason why you're on our webinar today. And you want to talk about it in each of these areas that we've discussed. You can get guidance about the World Health Organization. You can get guidance from the Centers for Disease Control. There could be a mandated governmental closure, but you're in control of making the decisions for your company and your organization. And that's what your leadership team needs to understand as we start to go through each of these areas. So we provide a variety of services. I mentioned this at the beginning. If you need assistance in any of the things we talked about, we're available. We're available to work with you and help you in each of the areas about what needs to be done and what can be accomplished. Whether it's looking at the crisis risk, handling staffing around it, dealing with security issues, because there will be, developing the plans and materials or training and exercises, providing the intelligence, the concept of monitoring for this particular problem. Firestorm has a program called First Sight that looks at behaviors of concern as well as events, and then benchmarking and analytical solutions. How do we compare to everyone else? By the way, Firestorm has an open benchmarking study going on now. I would encourage you to participate in that, and you would be the beneficiary of the report when it's completed. So what can you do now? First, you can download resources at firestorm.com. You can go there and there's information around communicable illness and pandemics. You can sign up for our newsletter. It comes out every Thursday, came out this morning, and it gives you timely articles and information and access to additional training and opportunities. We are doing a crisis management webinar next month with OnSolve, where you get a chance to be making decisions after an active shooter event in a real exercise, as well as training around those areas. We'll be talking about the year in review next month in a variety of things. You can establish a relationship with Firestorm if you're in a retained services agreement. We have a program called Crisis Stop, where we provide you the first hour of assistance in a crisis at no additional charge. And that's included in because if we can get with you before you make the wrong decision, take the wrong action, or say the wrong words, it will change the outcome. So I would encourage you to register for the webinars next month and the series as they continue. If you need assistance in the meantime, we're here. Now, we all hope that there won't be a pandemic. Historically, there's been a pandemic at least 3 times in each century. So as we move further and further into this century, the likelihood or probability will be increasing. Every day there are new illnesses that are emerged, And as I look at the reports coming out of the World Health Organization, many of these that emerge each year, there isn't a vaccine, there isn't a treatment or a cure. But having a plan in place to be able to recognize it, to try to mitigate its impacts directly into your company, will be one of the most critical aspects. Thank you for your participation today, and if we can be of any help, feel free to reach out to us. And until next month, Jim Satterfield at Firestorm, thank you for your time. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.